Hello, welcome to Agile World, a very special meetup. In fact, our very first meetup, and if this goes badly, our last meetup. So, Sabrina, how are you doing?
The same as I've been doing all day. No, I'm very well, thank you. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces. Hey, Cynthia, always got to give Cynthia a shout out. No, it's lovely to see.
You're scaring me.
One point to the stalker. Okay.
We're good friends, but also some new faces for me anyway. So thank you very much for everybody joining.
Yep. So we're going to just kick off, and I'd just like Mark and Cyril to introduce themselves. So, Mark, if you could go for it, just tell us who you are and why you think you're here.
I'm Mark Walsh. I've been at the software game a wee while. Started in Baker Street in London in 1987. Went out of it for a while, changed career, and I'm currently a consultant in London again. I started with the DSDM consortium way back when Jesus and Moses were doing software development. Ada Lovelace was running the team. So I'm both old and new school. And the reason I'm here is myself and Sabrina and Karl had a somewhat heated debate around estimation, metrics, and story points. And I took one position and said that we should get that out for further discussion, because my view is not always going to be right. It'll be based on my experience. So I wanted to share that with the team in a forum like this to see whether I'm mental or I've got the right thing and I'm on the right track. So I'm here to just get maybe a sense check from as many people as I possibly can.
Thank you, Mark. I'll answer your question about your mental state later. Cyril, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cyril Cost. So I'm slightly less experienced than Mark. I have 25 years of experience in digital. I started in mid 90s, and I did all my career in digital. So I started as a developer, then solutions architect, strategist, e-commerce manager, etc. I've done probably every type of job on the digital value chain. For the past 10 years, I've been really focusing on digital transformation, being a transformer and a practitioner that say, I deliver projects, I shape the projects, and I deliver them. And for the past few years, I've been more involved into also executive coaching, that say helping executives and their teams to deliver projects in an agile way. Whatever we mean by agile. And why I'm here, mainly because I unfortunately responded to a LinkedIn post of Mr. Karl Smith, where I strongly supported story points. So he just said, okay, just turn up on next Tuesday.
Yeah, I gazumped him, but that seems reasonable. So let's just kick it off from, I think, where we were last time. Mark, do you want to, I mean, you did like blow out the windows last time we spoke about this. If you'd like to sort of state your case, young man.
Yeah, let's start with the guy who's credited with bringing them to the fore, right? So even Ron Jeffries is now saying story points have just been hijacked now, right? He even goes as far into his own blog and apologizes for them, right? The exact quote is, "I'm sorry now." Okay? Because story points have been hijacked by people who don't understand the relative estimation of something small, something bigger than that, something bigger than that. And that was the way many, many years ago when we thought about changing from hours to something else. Gummy bears, we wanted something. We wanted to get away from timesheet planning. I started with a high street bank in 1997, and the first thing they used to say to me is, "Where's my Gantt chart and when can I get it?" Right? And that just froze the blood in most development teams, because we've now got this hard deadline that everybody's rushing against. But then the requirements were never right, the hardware was never right, the delivery date was never right, and we got battered to death for it. So, you know, you go back as far as Cohen as well. Cohen was saying estimation's a failure. The minute you go to estimate something without a context, you're going to fail, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen in a week's time. You don't know what's going to happen in 3 weeks' time. And you certainly don't, in a sprint planning session, get the ability to add in 50% contingency anymore, right? Do you remember back in the days where we used to add 20% onto everything the developer told us? Because they were adding on 20%, we were taking 20%, we played that game, right? So story points are just another way of almost creating failure the minute we start, because it's now not become a discussion between development teams. Oh, I think that's quite small, we could do 3 of them in a sprint. Or that's really big, we can only do 1 of them in an iteration, right? It's gone from there. It's now becoming punishment metrics. Hang on, I've got 5 teams and this one's brilliant and that one's rubbish, right? Wait a minute, let's measure them. Why is that? And story points are now being used, and this is what sparked Karl and I off, almost as a currency. I'll give you $1, you give me 1 story point, right? It doesn't work like that. I might have something that's completely complex and I didn't know about it, pick it off the board, and it's now causing me a major headache because I've got no discovery time in it. I've got no estimated actual effort added on for me not knowing. So I go, you know, to Jerry Muller in his estimation of metrics, right? Metrics is just going to kill us because it's now becoming the business stick to beat us, where the old plan used to be, you're late. Look at your RAG status. Look at your status. You're never going to make that deadline. So that's when we got beaten to death. Now we're getting beaten to death for not delivering 300 story points an hour, right? And I'm making that figure up. I'm only joking. But that's the problem. That's where I find the issue with story points. And when I sort of tried to look into this, Goldstein says the same thing, that the minute you begin to estimate, they're going to expect you to deliver exactly that. So they'll then change something that doesn't get added on. Your boxes go down. That doesn't get added on. Enabler stories, if you're into safe, doesn't get added on. Anything environmental doesn't get added on. So you're now up against, the minute you stop planning and estimating, catching up, right? But story points themselves were just a replacement for hours, right? The first thing major teams do now is, what does 1 story point equal, Mark? Equals 6.5 hours. There we go. What was the point of story points, right? Why didn't we just stick to hours? Now, if you go back to the original book from Jeff Sutherland, they were saying that ideal days, and Ron Jeffries says the same thing, ideal days is a 7-hour day where nobody comes and talks to me. That's where I'm at my most productive. When do we get that? I don't get 3 hours for governance meetings. I don't get 2 hours for security meetings. I don't get this. So I've already lost time the minute I've gone into the next meeting, right? Not built in. Certainly not added into my sprint plan. So again, with the ideal days, you go back further and you had Kent Beck talking about paired hours, right? Paired hours were something that they could burn down, that 2 people in XP programming would be the people who would do a 16-hour day with 2 people, right? So you burnt the hours down. Again, story points came back around, and everybody now says that output is really important. I want to change that, because I thought I would come up with a set of what could we go back to? What could we change? So no estimates. I love this. Vasco Duarte and Woody Zuel, right? No estimates at all. Or possibly just stories. How about 5 stories per sprint? But those stories must be functionality. They must be something that the client or customer didn't have previously. And then it comes to my one that's very contentious, and this is where it did blow up between Karl and I. Why not dollar value? Why not dollar value of a piece of my software being delivered onto something and making that customer money, or making that customer satisfied? Both in Jira and Azure DevOps tools allow a field that says business value. Why don't we concentrate on that? Forget story points. If I do 3,000 story points in a 6-month period and I have no working software, what's the point? I've burned down 3,000 story points, but I've got nothing to use. I've got nothing to use with a customer who's going to pay my customer or client dollars. So I'm going to kind of come to the end so that I allow plenty of time for everybody else. But I want to get away from story points because I think they've failed. They've become a metric that are getting used to beat us, and we didn't want that previously. Certainly, you know, my early career, 87, 89, it was all timesheet. When I moved to High Street Bank, it was all timesheets and plan driven. And we failed with that. And I see story points just being replaced, but being called something else. Now, something interesting I found while I was doing this, do you know that the Scrum Guide doesn't mention story points? It only mentions estimation. Neither does the manifesto.
That was something I picked up, actually. Sorry to butt in.
Go on.
One of the issues I find is the relativity of it.
Yeah.
It's highlighting it's an estimation, which I think a lot of places don't get. We are estimating. We're not saying it's exactly this. We are estimating. Sorry, that was brawling up. You know, I get really passionate about this.
Now that's a good point. And the problem is that our estimate becomes a deadline, right? I estimate it's going to take me 20 minutes to make a cup of tea. But what happens if the bell rings at the door? What happens if the dog has a poo while I'm going to the toilet, right? All of these things don't get factored into my estimation, right? And that's the problem. If I have 5 teams estimating 3 weeks cadence at 69 story points per day, that becomes a stick to beat me. I don't get the context, I don't get the change in the middle, and I certainly don't get the value at the end of it. Because I'll tell you, for many reasons, developers will jump on the easiest story points if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to burn down story points, they will do the look and feel changes and no integration, and you will be stuck with nothing at all, but you'll have hit your estimate. You see, and that's the problem. You're saying to somebody, I'm going to deliver 400 story points, but you won't be able to use it because it's not working software. So no, I take your point, and I think if we're going to try something else, and this is what I wanted the wider forum to do, is to suggest something, right? And I've got 3. Time estimates. Do we go back to them? Story estimates. Do we just say 5 stories that are one feature, and we give them a feature every time so that? Go on.
Omar's got his hand up. So Omar, what did you want to say?
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm so sorry to hear your pains, and I have felt them before. So I just want to put in that story points are for the team to estimate their own velocity, not for somebody else to point a gun at them.
But
nobody else is looking at those points.
But that's where it's been hijacked. That's my problem, right?
And that's where you should come in if you're the Scrum Master to shield the team from that.
It's so what I've experienced, right, is the minute you do that, somebody else, probably in a solutions team somewhere, has sold that. And that disconnect, certainly in the scaled world, is a real problem for us. And what I'm trying to highlight is that I could put a Scrum Master in there that protects the team and says, hey, make sure that when you're doing your planning poker, that you think of every story to a definition of done that's completely mature, right? That has 25 points on it, not just 3, right? Code done on box is not a definition of done, right? However, the business will say to you, why am I paying for that mature definition of done? I only need the code, right?
But that's the thing, Mark. You should be telling them what outcomes do you want, not what output, because these numbers can be manipulated.
I agreed, and that's that game, right? Where if I was a developer, many years ago, I would have sat and gone, "That's a 21, that's a 13, that's all I'm doing this sprint." Right? I would have played that game.
I mean, as far as I know, these numbers are only used by the development team to generally look at their capacity and guesstimate what they're going to deliver. If somebody outside of that team is getting hold of it, that's where it's all going wrong.
Agreed. And this is what I'm just highlighting.
Can I just get Stephen to come in, because he's a enterprise agile coach, although he doesn't like the terminology, but that's why I'm sticking in with it.
I hate the term agile coach. I think it gets misused by the industry. I would argue, Mark, that everything you've said is an indication of bad culture, not story points. And story points I love as a Scrum Master in the teams I work in. And as Omar said, those story points don't go outside the team. So when I work with a new team and they've never done estimation before, I'm saying this is an estimate. This isn't any sort of performance metric that I'm going to whip you with. It's just, this is how we get to a point where we can sort of say, we think it's going to be 10 sprints. Or it gives us an indication of where we're going. And all it is an indication and a point in time. So I will I normally bounce between governments and financial sectors, financial services sectors. And I'll say, this is an indication of what we know at this point in time, but what we know in 2 weeks is going to be different. So maybe the scope goes in, maybe the scope goes out, but this is the best indication of where I can get you. And I've worked with some quite immature clients where they go, oh, well, let's get everyone a story point together. And I'm like, no, that defeats it. You can't get every team to do story points the same. So you can't have that pyramid of this team does 50 story points a sprint, this team does 40 story points a sprint.
So Stephen, can I just interrupt you? Can I just get a show of hands or a raised hands on using the reactions of anyone that's come across this in their work that they've done? Just because I don't think Mark is disagreeing with you. I think his experience is different from you. So I've experienced this.
I've experienced it, but I've went in and told the client that's nuts and it's misused.
Yeah.
And that's not what it's there for. And I think it's then a cultural shift in the organization of moving away from that.
You can call it story points, or you can call it business value, or you can call it dollars, or you can call it peanuts. If it's being abused against you, it's going to be abused against you. I think I agree. It's a culture problem, not what do we call it problem.
Yeah, it's not an issue with story points. It's a cultural issue.
Okay, so I'm going to end that part and move over to Cyril because he's had a chance to prepare.
And it's great because I think all my arguments have more or less already been expressed. So I will insist on maybe the ones that Mark didn't really highlight, which is the complexity and why, for example, in terms of using story points is very useful in the estimation process using relative comparison, where say when the team is going to compare their past experiences to, okay, how are we going to deliver this story? Is it a 13? Is it a 21? As it was said, it's based on their own experience. And if you do that with hours or business value, you don't have this reference. It's far, I find it more difficult to express it in terms of relativity for the complexity specifically. And something you mentioned, you started to touch, it's we don't use story points in isolation. It just doesn't make sense. We use story points with a definition of ready, if you use it, or definition of done. And the capacity, as it was mentioned, the purpose of the story points and the estimation is to adjust the capacity of the sprint. So story points in itself, okay, you trash it if you don't like it, but the new tool, what you're going to be implemented, is going to be hijacked, you know it, by, again, the same people. We need to justify the salary. And as it was expressed, why not basically take back control of all story points? Okay, this is owned by the team, used by the team. People outside the team want to have a look, they have a look, but don't use it as a matrix. I think everybody agrees on that. That's very wrong. That's fundamentally very wrong. So is there an education issue? As it was mentioned, do agile coaches need to go back to the whiteboard and explain to people using story points outside the team that this is not how you do it. You have other metrics to measure the performance of a teams. And it's not because they are easily accessible in Jira that you have to use it. So I see it. I understand where your rage comes from. I got it. And it reminded me an experience I had a few years ago on a large e-commerce project. We were 150 members in the team, and about 10 agile teams. And a kind of product director decided that it was a great idea to compare our delivery, compare each team delivery, even it doesn't make sense. How do you compare my team compared to the security team, compared to the infrastructure team? It just doesn't make any sense to compare our story points. They mean absolutely nothing for the other teams. So I got it, and I think it's more an education issue. Once again, is how Agile is introduced, especially senior at the senior level, executives, how they understand. Do they ever need to know what is a story point? To be fair, and I think the education is there, and it's probably our responsibility. I think it's mostly a community of agile coaches, etc., to pass this message and explain that basically story points are not to do anything else than estimate capacities for a team.
So I'm going to throw in a grenade, if that's okay.
Yes.
And my grenade is I've been working with enterprise-wide finance and agile, supposedly management software systems. And I found out that most of them roll up story points to determine a trajectory.
But what does a story point mean to them?
It doesn't mean anything. For me, looking at it, it's a meaningless metric, because actually the story points shouldn't leave the team, because only the team has value for them, because the team has context for them. Yet in an agile world, there is a major and raging problem around metrics, and people are looking for any number-based system to validate that work is being done and that it's moving. So instead of saying we completed work, as Mark said, that added value, that has a dollar value, they're not interested in that, because actually they haven't closed that loop. A lot of the tech systems around Agile don't actually determine the go live and the feedback loop from the end usage. They don't cover the Jenkins part and the pipeline piece. So I think there's
Sorry, so we need to charge the story points because some people once again misuse them, or because they don't have other metrics to use. Yes, go ahead. I see some people raising their hand.
So I'm going to go to Stephen. You already spoken, but Greg, if you could go first, and then Eric. And then
I missed
Stephen.
the first part of the talk, but I always get very concerned when metrics are used outside teams. I think they're very useful within a team to help a team grow. The one usage of story points that I can see that is useful outside the team is not the number of story points. It is a trajectory towards completing a release. So if you say you're going to have a release done by 1st September, you need to be able to give stakeholders some confidence that you're in the right, based on what you know now, that you're on the right trajectory for that. And then you can warn them early on if there are any problems. But it shouldn't go beyond that. They shouldn't know how many points or how many people are actually working on it. All they should know is, are you going to hit the deadline or not?
Very cool. Eric, what did you want to say?
Sorry, I'm not really used to Zoom, so I'm still finding my way around. I apologise. I think a few people have mentioned now that story points shouldn't lead the development team. And I guess, Stephen, I think you mentioned it first of all. So I'd be interested to hear from your point of view as an Agile coach, like what would the Scrum Master report to the project managers? So if they're not passing on the story points, what are they telling the project managers? Are they just telling them it'll be completed by this sprint or next sprint, or will they give them like a time estimate?
So, Stephen?
So I think story points in a mature organization, in a good culture, you can use to predict release with the knowledge that you have at that point in time. So I use it in a governance perspective to say, to spot if any teams are struggling. So, you know, if a team's saying, hey, I think we're going to finish on this date, but actually, if we're tracking our releases through Jira, which I personally like, I'm saying, well, actually, what you're seeing doesn't reflect in the data that's in Jira. So do you need a hand? Do we need to move the, you know, or is we going to move the release date or whatever? But you can only have that discussion when you're in it, when you're in an organization that understands all of that process and understands it's an estimate. And if scope grows and more stuff we know, the release date will move out. But I use it from a governance perspective, story points into releases to basically keep everyone aligned. Because I have worked on, you know, a lot of projects where you do have drop dead dates, and you basically say, okay, we're in a little bit of a situation here. We're going to have to reduce scope to hit release, and that's how I control governance that way. So I think you can use story points to then go into releases. So that's what in my current client, that's how I'm getting them to think for the other teams for releases. So nobody basically says, my team's doing 50 story points, my team's doing 60. What you're really doing is then saying, right, tag these to a release. Is the data, as much data as we know at this point in time, matching what you're saying? So if someone's saying, my team's going to release our MVP the second week in September, but if I look in Jira and say, well, actually, your team is only doing this velocity when I dig underneath the surface, and that's now taking you to October, let's have a conversation. And that's not a whip, that's not a stick, that's a conversation of, do you need a hand? What can we do if it's a drop dead date to then hit your target? Which is, a lot of times, it's let's just cut down scope. So that's where I am currently. I try and get all the teams to report up that way. Because otherwise, if everyone just went, we'll report on story points, I'll just say, right, I'm doubling every story point that my team do, and we're looking like superstars. You know, and I also, in the current client, I'm working with their contracts team to get them to write their contracts in a more agile fashion. And I'm saying, if you do put story points in a contract, this is how consultants will rig it. Because if you say, I want you to do 60 story points a sprint, I'll just double everything. And I say, as I would as a consultant, just rig it like that. So this is what you've got. This is how it's abused in the industry.
Okay. Anurag, Shrestha.
Yeah, so I'll add to what Mark said. And the story points get further complicated if you work in a multi-vendor scenario where like you have different teams working, and then those teams are actually the performance is actually determined based on how much they are able to deliver, and that is not something it should be, but that is how it is actually working. So I have been working in that kind of environment where we have the client, and then we have called multiple companies who are supporting that client, and then how much we have taken, like what is our capacity, how much we were able to deliver, all of that is checked, and then that team is getting validated, or it is getting their performance is being evaluated based on how much we were able to deliver, which actually the story points was not meant to be. And the second point which I like to add here, again an extension of what Mark said, I've seen that happening, is that now there is a very thin line between what story point estimation is and how we are going to relate it with the hours. I've seen many teams doing, like, if you have one story point which is 8 hours, so that is how they are doing it now. Actually that is not. So you are actually doing the sizing of the piece of work. You're not actually telling how much time it will take. A new team can take more, experienced team can take less, but that is not actually how it is happening at this point. I can see that.
Thank you. Cynthia.
Okay. Well, I think we're missing the reason that story points are taking on the issues and things that you see is because Scrum is a team sport, and velocity, you'd have not come up to the project management wrapper or decided how you're going to take the information that the team is putting into the project management tool like Jira and deciding how you're going to report status. So if you don't give somebody like when something's going to be done, determine the percent complete, then you're definitely going to be looking at things that they're used to seeing, because nobody really understood traditional. That's why we suck at it. And nobody is understanding Agile either. So for me, story points initially are the relative size of a story. I use it to determine, especially with new teams, can they bring that story into the sprint, and will they finish it within the sprint? Does it need to be divided into something smaller? And I teach people, go with your gut, because you only have to be right 50% of the time and it'll average out. The second thing is velocity is not really a badge of how much you're getting done. It's a badge of predictability. So when you're doing sprint statistics, if you see you're going to get down 30 points and you only get down 20 points and you had to remove 10 points, was that because you added things? Was that because you have production issues? It's really something to analyze what's happening within the team. So how do you get people above that so that they're looking at percent complete and actual status reporting is like epics and sizing the features and then looking and labeling those features. And if you say a feature's 300 points and you say, I'm 150 points done, I'm 3/4 of the way through my project and I'm only halfway done, that's a completely transparent way to know whether you're on track or not. And that is really all that management wants. They want to know when it's going to be done and where you are, and they want to know what's happening. And that's what the sprint statistics will tell you if somebody asks what's happening on the team. So I think the major issue, and you're probably going to like beat me up about this, is because you haven't thought when you set up your project how you're going to report to management. And if you're not reporting milestones and percent complete against those milestones based on features that you sized with story points based on velocity, so you're comparing apples to apples, then what do you expect them to do? They need to know something. They're getting paid the big bucks to beat you up because they don't know when you're going to be finished and where you are in relation to where they want you to be. And I think story points are awesome because they take you away from hours and days. So if you're using hours and days, then really let's get to a different way of estimating story points, because without relative sizing, you just don't know. And you can do it in some other way, like t-shirt sizes, but they all get translated into something because you need a way to measure progress. And so that for me is why story points need to be used for what they're supposed to be used. 1, size of story. Can I do it within the sprint? 2, what's the team's velocity? And look at it for predictability, not how many. It's whether they're walking their talk. And 3, as a way to measure features so you can get a percent complete. Now I'll get off my soapbox, but that is my soapbox. And if we did practice these things and really came up and earned our money by explaining to people how we're upfront going to manage a project and report status, a lot of the issues that we're seeing here will fade away. But you need a sizing method that's relative and not based on hours.
Thanks, Cynthia. Anurag.
Yeah.
Anurag Singh, do you want to? Yeah. You've had your hand up a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Karl. And yeah, so I have little different opinion. Maybe that will be on the granular size, that how story pointing is relevant and important. So I see like the story pointing is important for understanding the backlog on 3 parameters. That is uncertainty, that is functional unknown, then complexity, that is technical unknown, and then amount of work, that is how much work has to be done. So these 3 factors are really important, because if we do not know these things, then how, if a story point is not in picture, then how those things will be reflected on any of the stories. So these factors like uncertainty, complexity, and amount of work is really required in terms of story points, because if we see that if any story is pointed very high, it means it requires some accuracy further to make it precise, right? And if there is any story which is you can say very less pointed, that means it has accuracy as well and precision as well. So someone who has pointed the story with less pointed, that means that has been well understood with accuracy and precision. So I believe that it is still relevant, but maybe if it is not, then there should be something else which I am really interested to know, and maybe other inputs will really help. And what the next, I believe that story points are contributing for the estimate, and estimate itself says that I am estimate, I am not real, right? So that is how it is really giving value as of now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I put my hand up as well because I'm a practitioner as well, and I've bit my tongue all the way through, ish. I come from a Scrum Master background. I've worked with dev teams, and don't tell anyone, but I can code. So I understand some of the pain of finding solutions in breakneck speed while under the thumb, and I understand the world since it changed towards Agile from what it was before, which was pretty damn horrible. So I understand where we're going through with this. I think I look at it and think, well, what would the world be like without story points, and what would it be like if we just continue as we are? So if we got rid of story points, what will change? Well, on the ground, it's going to hurt teams because they actually need to be challenged in their thinking. They need to be challenged in their relationship to their work and what work means. A lot of the time in development environments, people got a head down. No one disturb me, I'm going to do my bit, which is great if you are the only developer in the team. But if you're part of a wider group of people with dependencies upon other people, you need to have that conversation. You need to understand the complexity. But conversely, I'm also aware of teams of teams of teams of teams, 1,000 teams who are totally measured by story points, which is insane. That is utterly horrific because they are not apples and apples. And this is a dehumanizing factor. So I'm going to sit on the fence. It's a bit sharp and a bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to pass back over to Sabrina, who's now got something to say as well.
I don't sit on the fence. I'm very pro story pointing, but I've got a question for the group. So my first question would be, has anyone here ever done with their team? Because the one thing I do notice from my personal experience is story points normally go wrong for two reasons. This is just my personal experience. When it comes to leadership not understanding what points are, what they're used for, why we're using them, and almost an understanding of a conversion rate. Now, when I say a conversion rate, it's how do we convert the story points for them to understand that information, for them to also pass that on to their leadership, because at the end of the day, information needs passed up to the chain. But one thing I did want to ask everybody on their view is, anyone here ever done what is called either an anchoring session or a calibration session with their teams? Because that's another thing is so actually, can you all raise your hands? Who's ever done what's known either an anchoring session or a calibration session? Be quite interested. Because I found recently a lot of people don't actually do this with their teams. They implement story points, or a team decide they want a story point, but there's no anchoring to understand within each team. And this is private to each team, what their definition of a 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, etc. is. Which means actually, if you don't have that anchoring session over a period of time, who's to say that they are actually properly pointing, or are they just putting a finger in the air? Are they, do they know what the definition of one? But I just want to put that question out there. Who wants to add to that?
I'd like to add to that. I think that something I don't care about is the meaning of points drifting over time. What I care about is that 1 point roughly means we have an estimation net, and it might mean a particular thing. Over a period of years, it's okay if the definition of those points change, but just regularly, say once every 6 months, we rewrite the estimation net to say, when we're estimating, this is a reminder of what a 1, 2, 3, etc. mean. It doesn't matter if they shift over time, because I internally calibrate how many points per developer per day the devs are doing, just for my purposes, so that I can recommend to them how many points that they might want to commit to in the next sprint based on who's available.
Good point.
So Omar, you had your hand up.
Thank you. It was more of a question, actually. What do you mean by anchoring or calibration? Do you mean after? Well, I start with what do these mean to us, and I take them through a bit of a session to sort of talk about story points, why they're used, what's the benefit of using them, and then we go through a session of okay, let's sort of use t-shirt sizes, and then let's put an arbitrary number on these t-shirt sizes, and that's what we're going to stick with. But do you mean calibration as in once we've done a few sprints, we look back and then say, you know, what do 3 points mean? What do 8 points? What did 13 points mean?
So there's multiple different ways of doing it. Say, for example, you're starting with a very fresh team. They've never story pointed before. So normally around about, me personally, this is just what I personally do. It doesn't necessarily mean it works for everyone. After say about 2 or 3 sprints, when they start to get into the flow of things, you run an anchoring session. But a lot of people also forget that actually, if your team changes, you get a new member, you need to re-anchor. Also, when you say you're in the middle, you know, you're building, you're very fresh at the beginning of a product and you get halfway through a product, I'm all about knowledge and complexity. Now, when you're going through that product development, the knowledge and complexity change. So I also like to chuck in another anchoring session to make sure we're fine. I do it in multiple different ways. It's far as the way I do it, and the reason I do it is actually to make sure everybody's all in agreement and are on board. It's, for me, it's part of the team's ways of working. But I also sometimes like to get leadership involved, just so they can kind of see and understand it, because that's another area. The reason I've noticed when I've gone into a lot of companies where you'll get some leadership using like a carrot on a stick or multiple things that Mark has actually described, is also because they don't understand it. So sometimes I try and get them involved, but that's just my personal experience and things I'm doing. But I'm interested to hear everyone else's, because I'm a lifelong learner. I think we all are lifelong learners.
Yeah, so just to answer your question, I have done them. I just didn't understand the terminology. I haven't done it before.
That is fine. That is fine.
It's Moya here.
It's good to learn. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
Moya,
I was going to say to what was being said before. With the teams I work with, I'm not too concerned about what 1 point is or what 2 points is or what 3 points is. What I'm concerned is that everybody in the team has the same, is an agreement of what 1 point is and what 2 points are and what 3 points are. So that's, and I do that anchoring session. We, a bit like you, Sabrina, after a couple of weeks, a couple of sprints, we sit down with the team, I go through with them what story points are, give them a few examples, and as a team they agree on, I don't usually start with 1 point, I usually start at about 5 points, so that, because usually if you start 1 point, then you haven't got anywhere else to go down further than 1 point. So I usually start around like five points with the team to use that as the benchmark for where they will, whether they go higher than 5 points or lower than 5 points. But I try to make sure that everybody in the team, and like you, if a new person comes in, again, we need to just reassess and agree again that we all understand what 5 points means for that particular team. And so I have a couple of teams, and 5 points for one of my teams is not the same as 5 points for a different team.
And it's in, and I'm sure I'll be very surprised if a lot of you don't agree with me when I say this. When you're coaching, training, advising, what are you doing, Karl? My missus.
I'm just laughing at you prepping everyone that they should be agreeing with you before they've even heard what you've said.
Just saying, I'll be very surprised, right? Coaching, training, advising, however you do it, story points is incredibly difficult. It is extremely difficult because we are asking people to change a mindset that we have all been brought up to do from a young child. We have all been brought up in time. We were all taught as a child that you have to get up at this time, it takes you this long to get ready, to get to school at this time, and this is how long you're in school. We, even in our day-to-day lives now, we use time, but we're asking people to not use time anymore. We're asking them to point using knowledge and complexity. It makes it extremely hard. And it's a behavior and a mindset change. And then I'm going to throw out another question here. Sorry if I'm taking over. I don't mean to. I'm going to throw another question out of interest. How can we make this easier? And I'm going to leave it like that.
So, Sabrina, I would like to go back to your first question. So when I say, or when you say that anchoring session, so what would be that anchor be? So will that be a sample story or a template? What will that be? Because if you are going to say that, okay, this is my anchor, then you are actually saying that, okay, this took this much time. So relate everything around it. And then we are, I think, diverting from what story points are.
Yeah, so I use them as examples. So me personally, yet again, after say about 3 sprints, as an example, I'd pull up stories 1, 2, 3, 5, and I'd say, right, looking at that story, what's your definition of a 1? So I've had some teams, as an example, say a simple code change, which is a spelling mistake on the website, as an example. They'd use that as an example to say, well, we agree from development and QA side, that is our definition of 1. And you use real examples so they can kind of envision it, because it's their real examples, because it's the work that they've actually done. And I also normally go through and go, actually, now looking at the Fibonacci scale and at our points, what also is our definition of a story point that is too big to fit within our iteration or sprint cycle? What is our story point that we feel is too big, that needs to be split down? And what is the size of our story point, as an example, that we could class as an epic, and it needs to be really broken down? And you kind of get that, as I said, me personally, get that agreement within the team to kind of agree it, just so they can relatively kind of envision it.
So I'm just going to say 2 points. One, I threw a grenade in while Cyril was talking and he didn't get a chance to finish. So I should let everyone know that I created a spur in the conversation. So we do need to get back to it at some point. But Stephen, you had your hand up. I know you're pretending not to have your hand up now, but we saw it earlier. It's too late.
So one of the things I've done with teams who struggle with story points and really don't want to do it for whatever reason, if they've been burnt in the past, is you can measure teams by cycle time. So tell everyone, don't worry about story points, don't worry about estimation. I'll handle all of that side. Just do stories and just let it flow. Over time, you can get to a percentage that you're happy with as a Scrum Master. Sort of say, right, regardless if we were estimating, regardless of what the story is, 80% of the stories from start to end, so taken into a dev team, kicked out for ready for release, it takes 8 days. And I'll say to my clients, right, if we're not going to work in velocity, and I much prefer to do it this way because I'm a much big fan of Kanban, are you happy that regardless of what the size of the story, and regardless of what type of story, it's done 80% of the time in 8 days? Can you handle that? And we can use that information to then plan out releases. So if we know how many stories are in the backlog, you can just extricate and plan that going forward on when you probably hit release. And I've used that to get some people away from, right, we need to estimate everything because there's so much to estimate. I'm saying, don't worry about it. Start dev, we'll plot it out, and we'll work on actual data. And your team, you'll see this. If you can all plan it out, it's really easy. Just measure how long, how many days each story is, and you can get to an average. And you can just sort of say, right, that team, 70% of the time, it takes them, regardless of the size of the story, to do the story from beginning to end. And then I'll work with some clients to sort of say, does that work for you? And some clients will say yes, and some clients will say no. So I'm just curious, has anyone else used that to work with teams? Just to sort of say, if someone's really struggling, say, don't worry about estimation, we'll throw it out the window. We'll work like this. And I can work like that to then predict when you're going to get to release. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm going to come in on that because I can't seem to put my hand up. So I like that. And that was actually one of my suggestions of just burning down stories, right? Because that then takes that figure and I keep coming back to the same thing that we've just talked about. If I put a number on a sprint, it becomes measurable. Hang on, you said 60, 30, 20, 40, whatever it is. And to go back to Cynthia's point as well, that then does get bubbled up. And I know two of you said keep it within the team. I try, but somebody will want to know a status report at some point, right? So I have looked at this story idea, especially if it delivers a feature on demo day. So here's a feature you didn't have 8 days ago, to go back to your example. Here's 12 stories. You don't care how many story points it is, but on a form, that wireframe last week didn't have a search engine. It does now. Ta-da! And that is where I thought that I would like to see us go. And that's why I put it in my 3 examples. Because I like that, Stephen. I like that stories in a user's mind, oh, that's something I didn't have last time. That's now part of this, and I can now do this. And that ties back. I start UAT a lot earlier than a lot of other people because I want the users at the beginning of the process and not at the end. And what you've just said, I would love to see that being an approach, right? Forget how many story points are in those stories. I've just given you functionality that you didn't have previously. And I would love to be measured on that. If somebody then said, to take Cynthia's point, how many stories have you delivered in that sprint? 12. And now you've got more functionality than you had previously. So yeah, I'm in full agreement with that. I really like that approach.
So that's David Anderson's approach.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
But if I did want to stay as quiet because I knew that I was the catalyst for starting these conversations. I'm in the process in my mind of trying to come up with a reason for not doing story points. And I'm absolutely taking on the community's point of view that we should still be doing them and that there's some value in them. And I have been pushed on that. I have been moved. However, I still want to find something to replace them because I think as we progress in the next year and a half, where Agile becomes the methodology, I think it will be hijacked by the bean counters. It will be hijacked by project managers and program managers. Maybe I'm just in my experience at a forefront of a culture that may get bigger than the ones that we're trying to change. So I've taken all your points. They're all really, really valid. But I think the change into stories as the end of a sprint, I think I might research it a bit more. So I'll pick you up on that, Stephen.
So there's some really good stuff on Kanban University, which is David Anderson's website. So look it up, and there's a lot of thinking behind that. I'm only sad that a lot of it's not used in the real world. I'm always saying to the Kanban University, where these examples that I can use to sort of say, this company does it this way. So, you know, I sell it into various people, and it's just coming into industry now. So,
as I've said, my opinions are my own opinions, but in my organization, we have adopted Kanban University for papers 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And I'm the Agile lead within my organization, and we're getting more into bed with them. So I will be on the phone tomorrow, trust me. But I think what we've done is opened up a dialogue, right? That you've got 2 parts to this. You've got the trained part, the educated part that we've all gone through. We're all certified in a number of various methodologies. Then there's the actual in the real world stuff that we've all experienced, right? And I think the more we share that, the more that we can come together as a community and solve some of the issues that certainly I've got, that other people may be putting their hands up going, shit, now we're experiencing this. So no, this has been really valuable for me. I love that we've got some shared experiences. You've given me a lot of food for thought. It certainly gets Karl off my back because he argued for you guys. Now he's going to send me an email saying, fucking told you so. So yeah, thanks for that, everybody. But yeah,
you just need to send me that 50 quid and we're all done.
People, please do not swear.
So Omar's had his hand up. He's been trying to interrupt you peacefully. But
thank you very much. So again, I just wanted to share my experience from about 6 years back. I worked as a project manager, and I was sort of trying to do Agile at the time. And, you know, we, we used to sort of do months of writing up a project charter and a functional specification, and just try to like tie the client down so that we can nail them if they change any sort of, you know, details later on, which is a horrible way to work. And it was actually AELTC, so Wimbledon, and the lady there who was the director, she was quite clued in, and me and her, we had a deadline because it was about to start. Wimbledon was about to start, and we agreed that we would try this agile thing, and the way that we changed in terms of budget is that we said, like, let's just reconciliate every 2 weeks, so that we're delivering value, because we've got 3 developers, a UX guy, we know how much that's going to cost, and then we're going to go every 2 weeks, and we ended up delivering an MVP that cost them a fraction of the price of what we actually originally quoted them. And of course, they got what they needed, none of the bells and whistles. So I'm just saying that might be a good way to approach it, Mark, to sort of just start thinking of, just sort of reconciliation as you go. And then you get to a point where the client says, I'm very happy with this product. I don't need more of the stuff that I thought I wanted earlier on. That's my 2 cents on that one.
If I go back to when my first software company was in 1986, and the first thing we used to do was just prototype everything, right? It'll be up on a web server after 6 hours. Tell us what you want in rough, and we used to just do it that way, right? That was in 1996, right? And I want to do that with large corporate clients now, but, and this is the problem, crossing the divide, they just won't work like that, right? And that's why I'd love to get back to that. I'd love to get back to where we just said, see, by tonight, look at this folder online and it'll have a crap front end. Tell me what your thoughts are after that. And then I'll refine it on a daily basis until we get it right, right? And that was proper prototyping XP. That's my old background. Where I am now is everybody keeps going, oh, we're all agile. And I turn up and go, you're not. Please stop calling it that. Please stop doing that. And then obviously story points then got sold as a solution and not a solution. And that's where my ire with story points began. I was like, stop selling 5,000 story points, because all I'll give you is, a toilet roll at the end. That's it. That's all you're getting, right? And you won't have seen it for 9 months, because it will never have been released. You'll have 26 releases in Jira, and not one of them will have been released because it's not finished, not finished, not finished, not finished. So yeah, I take your point, Omar. I'd love to go back to them old ways where I put dodgy websites up for £350 a month.
Nicely put. So can we go back to Cyril? Because I kind of tangentially moved the entire thing away from him. Do you want to respond to all of that, or have you?
There's a lot of food for thought, because clearly I probably underestimated how story points were used in the upper level. I know that, in my product, I know it was misused to compare teams, but I didn't realize that now basically it was used as a matrix to measure the performance of the project, of the team. And I don't want to trash the tool, because the tool works well. I mean, what Sabrina explained, about the anchoring and the calibration is essential. It's something you need to do regularly. I usually do that, in the retro. But it's if story points are misused, how do we protect them? I think this is where I am right now, because if we don't do anything, we know, as Mark has explained, he has probably seen that as a kind of at the forefront of the wave, and the wave is coming. So how do we do? You can't really block that in Jira. You can't prevent people from accessing story points. So I go back to my point of education, but will that be enough?
I agree with that, Cyril. I think that's what I was looking for, an answer to what's going to happen, I think, in the coming few months. If I give you a horror story that somebody else told me about a different organization, they actually found another senior manager for another big four in London was going through Jira to check done points and was then asking for developers to be swapped out of teams. Right? Now, that's a horrific story because they were seen as underperforming. And that worries me. That type of use of story points worries me because it's all in our tools, right? TFS, Azure DevOps, and Jira all hold that. If I go to a release within Jira, I can see the number of stories in it, the number of issues currently work in progress, the number of issues done. Okay, I can check that as a status report, and I can come and beat somebody's door if you're not on track. And that's my worry, you know, and that's why I like what Stephen said. If we went to stories that were features and functionality was delivered, you'd get away from, because the story would be burned down by, if I slice it, my UX, my, you know, my middleware, my back end, my DevOps, my security, my operational readiness. They would all have put effort into that story moving through, right? So one developer wouldn't have been, hey, hang on, Cyril, you didn't deliver 12 points this sprint, but Stephen did. So I'm keeping Stephen and I'm getting rid of Cyril. And I just worry that that's where we're headed. And to go back again to Cynthia's point, stakeholders want to see something, right? They want to see something. They might want a RAG status, or they might want, you know, a burn down chart or a CFD or something. They want to hang their hat on where's my money being spent. And I've just got a fear, yes, partly experience, that story points are becoming a currency that they seem to think that they can buy.
I really appreciate why you have this fear and where it comes from, and should we only authorize people with decent agile training and understanding to report on agile project?
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
I think there is, but okay.
But like Stephen and Eric said, right, keep it within the team for a team. And I nearly fell into my own trap there. I was going to call it a team metric.
So I think, you know, we need to be careful about the whole metric word. It's kind of like saying to Superman, we've got some nice kryptonite for you. It's an issue that's not resolved currently, and Agile has butted into the business world with a bunch of things that we find useful in engineering that the business world has adopted without understanding what they are. You know, it's my favorite one is definition of done, because actually the business world think done is done, forever done. Whereas in technology, it's done just enough to get to the next step to do another set of done. And so I just think we need to be careful if we're going to, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why story points are derailing, because they seem to be a metric that could add value to business when in fact they don't. And I think there's an education piece there for business to understand that actually they are wasting their time with story points. They won't actually understand anything of value with them. And I mean, to Greg's point, they'll understand that something's happened, but you could do that by understanding the number of stories delivered. Something's happened, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that's useful.
You've hit something that practically happens right now, right? Being an old developer, I know when this is happening. I can see dev done and done, right, within Jira. And if I'm a dev and somebody's pushing me on story points, I'll fire it into test. I know it's coming back, but I'll have burned down my 3 points for the day, right? And That's already
and we will be doing a separate show for all the developers who want to be able to find their ways around story points and how to not really do anything.
But you see where the pressure's coming from, Carl?
Yeah.
I, as a developer, if three story points equals 6.5 hours on my timesheet, heaven forbid, then I'm going to burn them down with defects, file them across into the next one. Tests are going to send it back as a bug. I'll claim that story point as well. I've now done 5 for the week and not 3. Hey, aren't I great? But I've just thrown shit over the wall, knowing that I'm only burning it down, right?
I'm sure someone will notice at one point.
This is what my fear is, right? That story points are a delivery themselves, not functionality, not feature, not story.
So I think they're useful as an abstraction to help people get outside of their mindset of what they're doing, but I don't think they actually help businesses understand the status of work. And I think that's probably where we might need to leave it for the moment. I don't know how people feel about it. If there's burning things you want to say, I don't think we need breakout sessions because we've all been quite reasonable and interacted. But there are people on the call who haven't said anything. Is there anyone that wants to say something or state a position where you've not had a chance to speak before? We'll track you down later and find out. No, is anyone?
Have we not got a metric to measure who's been talking and who's not?
Yes, just my mind, which is not working anymore because I've spent a day working with a client. Sheila, do you want to share?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't really care about story points from a product perspective, which I've done a lot of product program management and enterprise level program management. What I want to know is what am I going to be able to deliver at the enterprise level, not just within IT. I really don't care about IT except as a support service, which is what everybody here is focused on, is if it's the dog, the tail wagging the dog is what seems to be happening with the way we're talking about story points. When from a business perspective, if you want to have a viable business going forward, you need to know what you're going to be able to deliver, and you want to be able to deliver it quickly. So story points used as a metric, I've never understood why they bothered. And I still don't, because I don't think it really matters in the greater scheme of things. But I'm listening to everybody talking, and most people are talking about it from a perspective of being a consultant and using that as something that goes into the statement of work or the contract. And I've certainly had that as something that was put into the contract or the statement of work, whichever side I was on. But what I really cared about is, what's the outcome? What am I going to be able to deliver?
So just for context, there's lots of different kinds of people here. So I think there's a lot of people with deep knowledge of software development, certainly. But I've seen story points used in legal practices to determine the flow of work around delivering of briefs. So it's not a software issue. It's an issue going back to understanding the flow of work and the complexity of work that is being misused into other parts of organizations as a metric. I think that is still remains the issue. I don't think we've resolved it. I think we've come up with some things that we could concentrate on and refocus our efforts with the people we're talking to, but I don't think we've got a solution here.
No, I don't think there's a solution. And I think if you're using story points as a tool, the other thing is within a team, even if you've got a small development team, unless it's a company that's only that small development team, you've got dependencies outside of that team. And a lot of times when I was trying to plan out work and see what could actually be delivered, the story points aren't interchangeable unless everyone on the team really can do things interchangeably and has access and knowledge to do them. And usually you have dependencies outside of that team into things like infrastructure and into specific skills that aren't available within the team. So they're a useful tool, but to use them to judge people's performance, and definitely I've been a QA manager as well, and I'm familiar with what someone was talking about, pushing the story even though you know it's not ready. And as the QA manager, I would demand to see the successful test results from the unit and system test type activities before I would even accept the story into a QA environment. But that's not the way everything is structured. So depending on the company you're in, you may be able to get away with that. And again, that's where story points are very limited in their usefulness, and trying to make them do things that they're not really designed to do, and working with people who don't understand them. The other thing I heard somebody say was that maybe only people who really understand story points should be able to do, I don't know what they were saying, but it sounded like they were saying those were the only ones that should be able to do estimating for the project or use them. But at a point where you're going outside of the team to business management, and I've worked in companies where I was using these things for outside of IT, but you still run into that thing where they're going to look for some way to measure, and people generally wind up in a lot of the organizations equate story points to time. So even though you're trying to say it's different and each team is going to estimate differently, people in their heads come up with a way that they track the story points back to a certain amount of time, and there is no padding, and it doesn't take into consideration issues that haven't been looked at, because you are starting from something that's not as well defined as in the older things where you finished all of your requirements before you did any design, and you finished all of your design before you did any development, but you're able to respond more quickly.
Okay, well, thank you, Sheila. Stephen, you had your hand up. Your hand's been very busy today.
Yeah, I was just waving bye because a few people were saying bye. Sorry, I wasn't putting my
that's
hand
okay.
up.
Well, I think it's time. The polls come back with 82% of the I like using the percentage because it makes it sound like we had far more people attending. 82% of the people that attended want to do another session, so we'll set that up. We'll give people a bit of a breather space. I think also it'd be useful to decide where we want to take the conversation, because again, I don't want to do the same conversation twice. we kind of agree there's a problem. There's some tactics, I think, that have been brought up, and some ways forward. Mark?
I think for me, my takeaways are culture change. How do we go about that? And communication outside of teams. That's the two main points for me.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest things is, you need to compare to the person that's wanting to do this with something that will make sense to them. If they're a sports fan, then, when you ask the guy at the striker at the beginning of the season, is that, oh, well, I estimate that I'm going to have 26 goals this season. Are you going to judge him on that estimate, or are you going to judge him at the end of the season when he scored 19? What makes sense? I mean, to me, that's the simplest argument to people trying to use story points to hold your feet to the fire for something. It's an estimate.
I think, Jason, you've reminded me, unfortunately, if I'm paying that striker $1 million per goal and he takes 26 million off me and only gives me 19, I'm asking for 7 back.
But it's his estimate what he thinks he can do. He's not sure. Maybe the defense has evolved over the seasons. Maybe they're triple teaming him by the middle of the season. Things change. The point is, an estimate is just that. It's an estimate. It's never going to be 100% accurate. And to measure someone on an estimate, to me, is ridiculous.
I agree, mate. I agree. And I'm just being devil's advocate there. Unfortunately, some senior stakeholders have that mentality, right? And they don't get the context. Imagine nobody services that striker in your analogy. Nobody gives him the ball. Somebody's got the pitch looking like this and he can never score, right? That is the problem. I might estimate 200 story points for a sprint, and yet I have a major power outage for 5 days, right? Again, context, right? So yeah, I've loved this. This has been fantastic for me. It's really opened my eyes to further things that I'm going to work on. But yeah, I'm very intrigued now to see what story point solutions we come up with. I think that'll be next for us. What do we do? What do we do if we're challenged in 6 months' time? And as Sheila said, right, there are some statements of work out there that will put 3,000 story points as a deliverable. How do we combat that? What do we do about that? So that's what I say. Let's, as a group, the same way as our previous predecessors, they were getting involved to get away from waterfall but preempt what was coming next. I think as a community, we can start to do that, because business is going to get more involved in this. We've already got HR calling themselves Agile HR, right? That's hilarious. So it's coming. It's a wave of business interference, if you want to call it that we're going to have to work out these things. How do I do RAG status reports, but in a dashboard from Jira? will that? Yes, Amoye, I agree. It is, and it's going to get worse or different or more. I think we've lost.
I just wanted to say sorry. I actually had. I don't want to go into too much detail because I know this is being recorded. But I actually had a conversation with a business person in the business I work for today about story points, and it was a pretty tough conversation. It was actually about Agile in general, but then it went to, I want to make this Agile DevOps show me the burn rate for individuals. So that I thought, no, I was like, no. But it was a tough conversation, and it hasn't finished yet. So I think I don't know. I think it's already too late. I think the horse has bolted and it's here.
Never give up. Never give up.
I agree. I've had chief executives asking for lag rates. When was a story raised and when did it get complete? CFDs so that you can see where the bottlenecks are, so we can fire them. This is coming, right? These types of metrics and reporting is going to come, because if we move everything to an Agile framework, they'll then say, hang on, last year I spent 20 million doing this. I've spent 30 million, but I've not got any more reward. Hang on, you told me Agile was going to be quicker, better, faster, smarter, right? And they're going to nail us to the wall on it because that's the way that they work. And that's not a bad thing. They're business people, right? They want to give us 20 million and we give them 30 million back in return on investment. That's just what they want. But if we go back to the old days and they give us $50 million in technology black hole and we're just a cost center, that's going to be something that we're going to have to face as Agile practitioners, that they will blame Agile, right? They will look at the bottom line and go, I spent 10 million on this new thing you called Agile, and I didn't get any more return on investment. So have I wasted my money, right? And that's kind of where I'm going with this kind of, what do we do to protect ourselves as practitioners in the future? Because they're going to say, Mark, I gave you $10, I wanted 15 back, I didn't get it. Where's my report? Okay, Carl's gone down. Go ahead,
this is why we earn our money. So this is the challenge that we all have, and this is why when I go in and work with various clients, I sort of lay it all on the table. I'll say, what's important to you? This is what velocity is. This is what cycle time is. What's important to you? And as I sort of saying, I work with someone to sort of steer their contracts to more value-based and outcome-based, high-level outcomes to get away from all of that. Still a work in progress, so I haven't won the battle yet.
Well, I wrote a paper. I was at university 5 years ago, and I can see everything going on almost to a joint venture model in a couple of years' time, where company X will turn up at company Y, and I'll say, right, I represent company X. You give us $4 million, we'll give you 20 back over a 3-year period, but we don't want a daily rate. We want half of the profits. Right, and then that shared risk model will allow that technology company to be in, get results, get the return on investment, and then come back out again. And that was something that our chief executive many years ago came up with. Sadly, no longer with us. But I see that going further forward as a joint venture, that we can prove that we can deliver, but we want the return benefits. We want a share of them as well. So yeah, I agree.
Can I say, Mark, that I mean, there's obviously many different types of benefits for using Agile, and a lot of companies want the money but they don't provide the vision. And, you know, like if you're just after money, you know, you're just going to shove people over. You know, you're not going to be focused on, say, you know, I don't know, like what is the vision of your company? What are you trying to achieve here? And if the vision is just to make a lot of money, then, you know, maybe not. Agile doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for everybody.
Amen, brother. Amen.
You know, if you know, I work for Cancer Research UK, and our vision is to save lives, right? You know, we're not. Our vision is not to make. Well, yeah, of course we want the money because that's going to go into research to help people cure cancer. But we focus on the bit where we're trying to save lives, not how much money we're making, and that's the sort of the mentality, the different mentality. You know, if I don't want to say banking because not all banking is bad, you know, but like, you know, they've got to change their mindset. And, you know, you work with a lot of teams that are developing, and you're creating bubbles of Agile, and then you're hitting a glass ceiling where leadership needs to be on board. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Agile's not going to work unless you've got the leadership on board as well.
So I many years ago, when I was kind of in and around the XP Agile scene, I had a meeting with an executive, and we were discussing different ways of working. And he said, no, we won't be doing anything Agile. And I said, look, there might be. He said, no, not going to touch it. And I said, why is that? And he goes, we're air traffic control, son. So our risk is not that I might knock over a box, is that a plane falls out the sky with 250 people on it. We will not be doing Agile. And you're right. Early on in the manifesto, the team at Snowbird said, this might not be for everybody, right? That's what you need to do. But sometimes you do get executives that read the business papers, and this is the buzzword, and this is the thing that we've got to adopt, and it will make us more money in because it says it's quicker, better, faster, smarter. And they do it badly, much to Stephen's early point. And then you go in and you go, what's this?
Yeah.
Oh, this is Agile. I don't think so, mate.
As I said, there are many different benefits to Agile, like people's satisfaction. You know, you're looking after.
I think we're going to stop the recording, but keep the conversation open, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
And everyone who didn't make it, you can rue the day that you weren't here at this time. But for now, we're going to stop the conversation, at least the video, but continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone.